Good morning and welcome to episode 384 of the show. I think I forgot to mention to you guys that I was going to have an Instagram live session with Evolve Africa. Actually, that's now in the past because it held on Saturday, the 7th of May, 2022. Okay, this is the 16th. Okay, so that's well over a week ago. So yeah, I had an Instagram live with them, and it was a really interesting one because typically, whenever I have a session, whether a training session or an Instagram live or some other sort of engagement or collaboration with some other entity, usually I like it to be built around just one topic so that we can go in depth. But since this was an Instagram live and they had loads of topics that they wanted us to talk about, especially related to people in the startup space, I figured let me just do something fresh. I'm going to just stick to my old habits. And so we tackled lots of questions than I would normally take in one session. Anyway, the plan was that if the Instagram live went really well, they would have the recording on their handle, and then they would send me the video as well, so that I could also share it on my own Instagram handle, and then also rip the audio and then put it here on the podcast. Unfortunately, things didn't go according to plan. We had a real nice, fun, and vibrant session with people signing up and a couple of people even having questions to see how the topics that we discussed, how they apply to their own business in particular. So even though there was all that fun and all that vibrancy, unfortunately, the session kept timing out either because of internet issues. We haven't been able to troubleshoot exactly what the problem was, whether it was the internet from my own end or the internet connection from their own end. But there were several timeouts, and it just didn't make sense to have that's stored permanently on anybody's feed, where things would cut back out, and then we would have to sign back in and then restart. So it didn't have much. It didn't make sense to have that patchy thing up on anybody's handle, even though it was a wonderful session. And so because of that, I figured that I would just run through some of the topics that we spoke about over there, so that those of you, my family over here, can get exposed to the good stuff that we discussed with Evolve Africa on the Instagram live session on Saturday, the 7th of May, 2022. So, and I guess it's even better this way because I think our session went close to 2 hours, and I have tried to make it a habit not to go more than 20 minutes over here. Although ideally I like to shoot for 10 minutes, but I've tried not to go more than 20 minutes. Although if you check some of the earlier recordings that we have here, if this is your first time listening, don't be surprised if because you've listened to this recording and previous recordings, and so you're used to the 10-minute thing. In the older episodes, yes, there are times, especially in the introductory parts, where I went beyond that, where I did 30, maybe 45-minute recordings, because I was trying to expose people to what sales and personal selling is about, especially from a more comprehensive academic background, if I can put it that way, just so that you could be exposed to the whole host of ideas and principles that are involved in sales and personal selling. So, if this is your first time listening to the show, please listen to previous episodes as well. But just be aware that if you go all the way back to episode 1, don't expect everything to be as short and crisp as this episode is going to be, or future episodes. Well, be that as it may, that's one of the reasons why it's good to subscribe, so that everything is always here and you can listen to it at your own pace. And then plus, if you're like me, you probably listen to your own, the podcast that you subscribe to, you probably listen to them at 2x or 3x. I'm hoping one day somebody's going to release 4x, so that way we can really blaze through an episode, so that instead of listening to one podcast episode for 1 hour, you can be done with it in 15 minutes, because there's some people who go really long. I hear that there's this guy, what's his name? I can't remember his name, the former wrestler on Spotify. Was he a wrestler or a mixed martial artist? Anyway, some of his episodes go 3 hours, 4 hours. There's this philosophical podcast I like to listen to, Pints with Aquinas. It's a philosophy-based podcast on ideas around philosophy, theology, natural law, things like that, and sometimes they can go 2 hours. Anyway, I digress. So, where were we? Evolve Africa, and several questions. So let's just jump right in. So the first question was, who is a startup? That's that's a really interesting and important question to ask, because most people just assume that you are not a startup because you are not in the tech space. So a photographer, for instance, will not say he is running a startup, or a wedding planner is not going to say that he or she is running a startup, just because when we hear startup, from what we've seen in movies, what else, documentaries, social media, when you hear startup, you think tech. But I checked, and it seems that a startup is just anyone in the initial stages of running or promoting a business. So I checked a couple of resources. So if you're in the initial stages of running or promoting a business, then you're a startup. So even if you're trying to set up Ebony Live, like Mo Abudu, you're trying to set up something like that. In the early days, when she was doing what she was doing, that was a startup, even though it was not tech related. So now, yes, Mo Abudu might have some tech related aspects to the business because of the Ebony Live app. I think that they tried setting up their own streaming services. I think that's just before they got into partnership with Netflix so that they can produce content. So you would say right from the beginning she was a startup, and it's not just at the time when they were considering an app for streaming or partnership with Netflix. That is not the time when you can say that she was a startup, because her business actually at that point was already huge and at a pan-African stage. I guess you can say an international stage. So if you're in the initial stages, you are running a startup. Like I said, usually people say this only for people in the tech space. For those of us in the wedding and the event space, we would say no, we're not a startup. But the answer to the question is quite simple. Are you running a startup if you're a photographer or a wedding planner? Then the answer is yes. But that's the broad definition. And then, of course, that assumes that you are in the process of running or promoting a business. So you're trying to build something with sustainable systems and processes in place that eventually grows beyond you. So if you're thinking about this as a lifestyle business, I'm going to be self-employed, I'll shoot my weddings, I'll take things at my own pace, I'm just going to chill and have the easy life, then in that case, no, you are not running a startup. But if the goal is you're going to try and build some system around it, like Studio 24 here in Abuja. At least I think it's Studio 24. I can't remember if it's 23 or 24. But Studio 24, they have loads of outlets in Abuja, 4 or 5 in Central Business District alone. I hear that they're in Kaduna now, and they're also in several parts of the East. So folks like that, yeah, in the early days, that was definitely startup, and now they seem to have achieved some spread in the market. So don't say that because I'm in the wedding space or I'm in the entertainment space or you're in the whatever space that you don't have a startup. So what you have is a startup. And that was the first good news nugget that we deliver to people over at Evolve Africa, that you don't have to feel inferior. So long as you have these kinds of aspirations of building a business, you are a startup. However, even if you insist that because you're not in the tech space, you are not a startup, because there's some people who are going to hold to that new definition that to be a startup, you have to be tech related. So even if you're going to hold to this definition that no, you are not a startup because you are in the wedding space, you are a wedding planner, that's not a problem. You can say, yes, I'm not a startup, but you should now make a positive and concerted effort to adopt the startup mentality when it comes to running our businesses. Because that's one thing I really, really like about all those guys and girls in the tech space, and that's the reason why I talk about them a bit on the podcast, because I try to hang out in tech hubs and some of those communities here in Abuja. Also because I'm looking for new audiences about how we can push this gospel of sales, since it's something that is not known and underappreciated. In the tech space, people just assume that if your app is all right, or whatever the business idea is, that if the product idea is all right, then people are just going to hop on board. So I'm also trying to bring to them the gospel of sales, so they can realize that there is something else proactive that we have to do on our own part. But hanging out with those kinds of people, I can see, and you will eventually, that they do have a certain mentality and attitude towards business that those of us in the wedding and the event space would do well to adopt. So yes, even if you're not a startup, adopt that startup mentality when it comes to running your business. Now, in the early days, one of the things that startup boys and girls seem to be concerned with is number one, product market fit. Now, this is the idea that the product, that the app, that the website, that the whatever it is that they're designing, whether software or hardware, they want to be sure that the product meets an actual need in the market. And that's why I've been talking about on this podcast the idea about market validation. So this is your first time of listening to the show. Welcome on board. Once you're done with this, skip back to the over 380 episodes that we have so far, and you will find subjects that have market validation in the heading, in the subject, and then those are episodes that you should listen to a little bit more so you can get some more detail about what market validation is, and particularly my own slant when it comes to the idea of market validation. So we have to be quick to validate the idea. We have to move fast, which is what these tech startup people like to do. Move fast, gain access to the market so you can get some feedback about whether this is a valid idea or not, whether this is a good idea or not. An example that I gave was when I started in my wedding photography practice. I had this thesis that people would want to pay for photographs that have not been overly retouched and that are just natural. And I should have spent most of my time trying to validate that idea in the market. Seek out people who are tired of Photoshop. Seek out people who want it simple. Seek out people who want it natural, and go hard at that market base only. But I made the mistake of trying to shoot and cover for everyone. So if I found people who wanted things the way that I shot, I'll be happy. But if I found people who wanted powder to be applied to their face and all those Photoshop stuff, I would still shoot the wedding. Then I'll just pay somebody else to do that thing. But that's something that people in the tech space are not going to do. They're not going to waste their time. Let me try this idea. Let me try that idea. Let me try this. Let me try this. They'll go straight to the market. This is the idea. An app that does this, or a machine that does that, or a website that does this. And they're going to go hard. Is this idea going to work or not? So they're trying to sell into the market. They're trying to convince people. They're trying to move their idea because they're trying to answer just one central question. Do we have product market fit? And if there's no fit, they're going to move on. We'll see that in subsequent. Anyway, we're going to see some of that as we talk some more over here. So, product market fit, market validation, those are things that we should concern ourselves with. So, if you want to come into this wedding and event space and you say, I love black and white photos, and so that is only what I'm going to do from start to the end, I'm going to shoot the wedding in only black and white, then that should be your core drive when you come in. Don't come in as a black and white specialist, but if somebody wants color, okay, maybe you will do it because you need the money or whatever. Just hit the ground running. I'm going to do black and white photography only. That's only what I'm interested in. And start asking yourself the hard questions. People who like black and white photography, where do they hang out? What kind of online spaces are they at? How can I find them? How can I target them? Stuff like that. Just hit it hard and go straight. Try and validate the ideas. So all your sales and your marketing efforts should be built around answering that central question, so that, as I said, you can either grow now or you can pivot tomorrow. So if you give it a go, you've tried 6 months, 1 year, only to answer that question, that is there a market for black and white wedding photography or whatever kind of newfangled wedding planning that you're trying to try out, like this whole beach wedding experiment that seems to be going on in Lag. I'm still seeing a few more beach weddings, even though I think they must be really uncomfortable because you know how Lag is. The sand is not very you know how the sand feels now. It's kind of wet and disgusting, and then horse poop, and then the sunshine, and then that salty air and all that. So anyway, the experiment seems to be ongoing, and I guess eventually the wedding planners there and the core people in Lagos are going to be able to validate the idea to see whether this thing is going to work, this idea of beach weddings in Niger. So drive hard, answer the question, is there a product market fit, so that you can grow now or tomorrow you can move on to something else. And then another thing that they're concerned with, peeps in the tech space, startup tech space, is that they're concerned with market adoption. And that's the whole idea about how quickly are people piling on. So now, yes, we've seen that there's a market, but then are people adopting it quickly? If there's a slow build or whether there's a quick build, it all goes towards answering this question of if there's a profitable venture here. Is there enough attention to build something valuable here? So if the black and white thing works, or for those people in Lagos, you're trying to do this beach wedding bougie stuff. So if it looks like this thing is working, but it's like people are not really piling on, or people are piling on, but then there's there's plenty of demand. I mean, that also goes to help answer the question of whether we should remain in this business now or whether we should move on and try something else. And then, okay, let me wrap up. We're at 15 minutes. And then there's also the question of financing. So people in the tech space, in the tech startup space, whenever they get into the game, they don't faff about. They ask themselves the question from the upfront: are we going to look for external finance? Are we going to look for people to give us money? Or are we going to bootstraps? Are we going to use our profits from our sales? So they don't waste time. They get straight to the question. And that's something that a lot of us just kind of faff about. You don't ask yourself, you're not really clear on. Well, you have to be upfront. You need to know. Are you going to ask Popsy for money? Are you going to ask Momsy for money? Are you going to ask Uncle and Auntie? Are you going to look for investors, or am I just going to bootstrap this thing and then see how I'm going to do with sales? So we don't ask ourselves those hard questions, and it's something that we need to know upfront so that we can get the ball rolling. Because if you want to bootstrap, then you know that pretty much you have to hit the ground running when it comes to sales and marketing. Whether it's your Instagram campaign or Facebook ads or whatever it is, you have to hit the ground running, sharp, 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 because you have to bring the profits in, because that is how you plan to grow. And then if it's external finance, you need to know straight up whether you're going to start begging for money now. But this whole thing of getting into a business space, for those of us in the wedding space, you start your wedding photography, but you haven't asked yourself these hard questions. How am I going to get my first camera? Where am I going to get lights from and things like that? Am I going to go around and borrow from my friends and family members, or am I going to save the job from the job that I'm doing now, or am I just going to buy one camera and shoot as many weddings as possible, have enough money to buy the flash, do as many as possible, get enough money to buy more lights, and then do as many more as possible, then get money for the studio space? We need to ask ourselves these questions upfront so that we can have a well thought out and structured approach for entering into our space. So, are you a startup? Again, the answer is yes, if you use the broad definition, so long as you want to create a business and systems and processes that are going to go beyond you. But if you don't think that you are a startup, these are the things, these are the ideas about how the startup boys and girls approach getting into business that we should adopt, that are going to make us increase our chances of being much more successful. So think about product market fit. Does my product meet an actual need? How can we validate this idea? Market adoption. Are people piling on quickly, or is this really slow? These two are concerned with whether we should remain where we are. Should we stay the course, or should we pivot? Should we try something else tomorrow? And then the whole thing around financing. Let's be very clear before we step into this cake game or wedding planning game or photography game. Am I going to borrow money? Am I going to go and beg for money? Or is this business going to grow based on the profits that I make? So even if you don't consider yourself a startup, this is a healthy approach to get your business going, no matter what space you are involved in. So thank you very much for listening to today's show. I'm your host, Abuja-based sales consultant, Tavishima George Aide. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I'll catch you guys at the next recording.